Few writings in the biblical canon match the complexity and spiritual weight of the Book of Daniel. It stands as a profound intersection between history and prophecy, a place where real kings and kingdoms share space with visions that pierce through time. This book, nestled in the exile literature of the Old Testament, refuses to remain static. It draws its readers into a world of foreign courts and angelic messengers, of tyrannical decrees and unshakable devotion. At the heart of it all is Daniel, a young Hebrew exile who becomes both a servant to the most powerful rulers of his age and a vessel for divine revelation that transcends generations. Through his story, the boundaries between the temporal and the eternal begin to blur. Babylon, the dominant empire of its day, serves not only as a geographic setting, but as a symbol of mankind's attempt to build dominion without God. Its golden idols and insatiable hunger for power reflect more than just the characteristics of a single kingdom. They mirror the spiritual condition of any culture that exalts pride over humility and control over obedience. Into this environment, Daniel is taken against his will. He is exiled from Jerusalem, torn from familiar rituals and sacred spaces, and placed in a system designed to erase his identity. Yet instead of being crushed by the pressures of assimilation, Daniel becomes a beacon of integrity, proving that even in captivity, the human spirit anchored in faith cannot be silenced. What makes Daniel's story extraordinary is not just the dramatic events that surround him, but the consistency of his devotion. Whether navigating the political intrigues of Nebuchadnezzar's court or receiving terrifying visions of beasts and kingdoms, Daniel maintains a posture of prayer and humility. He speaks truth without fear, even when it puts his life at risk. And he listens not to the voices of power or popularity, but to the voice of heaven. This spiritual attentiveness is not a trait developed overnight. It is the fruit of daily faithfulness, of choosing the unseen over the visible, of trusting God's voice over man's command. The structure of the book itself reflects its dual nature. The early chapters are rich in narrative, recounting historical events with moral and theological implications. The latter half shifts into apocalyptic language, unveiling a series of visions that reveal the rise and fall of empires, the unseen spiritual war behind human history, and the promise of a kingdom that will never end. This transition is not jarring, it is deliberate. It invites the reader to understand that the same God who protects individuals in the fire and the lion's den is also the one who governs history with justice and precision. What binds the entire book together is its unyielding focus on divine sovereignty. Daniel lived through the fall of Jerusalem, the reigns of multiple foreign rulers, and the decline of one empire as another rose. Yet through every shift in political power, he remained confident that a higher throne stood above them all. This conviction did not make him passive. It made him resilient. Because he trusted in the God who sets up kings and removes them, he could serve faithfully without ever becoming compromised. His life is not just a testimony to personal piety, but a declaration that the kingdom of God operates even in the shadow of the strongest empires. To begin reading Daniel is to accept an invitation, not just to witness the past, but to reflect on the present. Its themes are not locked in ancient stone. They are written into the fabric of modern life. In a world still full of competing loyalties, public pressures, and subtle compromises, Daniel's story offers a path marked by clarity, conviction, and courage. He was a man shaped by exile, but not defined by it. And as the narrative unfolds, we begin to see that his journey is not so distant from our own. The journey of Daniel did not begin with visions of beasts or the interpreting of dreams, but with chains. Before he stood before kings or heard the whisper of heaven, he walked through the ruins of Jerusalem as a captive. He was young, probably still in his teenage years, when Babylon's shadow swallowed his homeland. The temple, once filled with the presence of God, was desecrated. The walls of Jerusalem were left in disrepair. Families were torn apart. Promises seemed buried beneath ash and stone. And among the chosen few taken by force into exile, Daniel found himself not just uprooted from home, but thrust into a world determined to reshape him from the inside out. The Empire of Babylon did not merely conquer territories with swords and siege engines. It also sought to conquer identity, language, and loyalty. Nebuchadnezzar's strategy was as psychological as it was physical. From the nobility of Judah, he selected the finest young men, those without blemish, skilled in knowledge, quick in understanding, and able to serve in the royal court. Daniel, along with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, was handpicked for this purpose. Their Hebrew names, rich with references to the God of Israel, were quickly stripped from them. In their place came Babylonian names honoring foreign deities: Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This was no small change. It was the beginning of an attempt to reforge their very essence, to overwrite their history with a new allegiance. Yet from the start, Daniel drew a line not with loud resistance, but with quiet resolve. When the king ordered that these young men eat from his royal provisions, partake in food and wine likely offered to idols and prepared contrary to their dietary laws, Daniel chose a different path. In what may seem like a minor decision, he asked not to defile himself with the king's food. It was a request made not in defiance, but in dignity. Daniel approached the chief official with respect and proposed a test. Let him and his friends eat only vegetables and drink water for 10 days. And then compare their appearance with those who ate the royal rations. The courage of that choice is often overlooked. Daniel was a foreigner in a hostile empire. He had no political power, no military backup, no guarantee of protection. Refusing the king's food could have easily been interpreted as rebellion. Yet Daniel understood that integrity begins with what seems small. He did not wait for a grand stage to prove his faithfulness. He began with what was within his reach, trusting that God saw and honored the heart behind the decision. After 10 days, the results were undeniable. Daniel and his companions looked healthier and more nourished than any of the others. But the favor they gained in appearance was only the beginning. God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and to Daniel in particular, understanding in all visions and dreams. The very system designed to erase their identity became the stage upon which their distinction was revealed. This moment in Daniel's life is a portrait of what it means to be in the world, but not of it. He did not isolate himself, nor did he lash out against the culture he was placed in. Instead, he engaged with discernment. He learned the language and literature of the Babylonians, but he never surrendered his values. He participated without assimilating. He served without compromising. He adapted without losing his anchor. Daniel's decision regarding food might appear minor in contrast to the more dramatic events that would later define his life. Yet it speaks to the quiet strength of someone who knows who he is before God. Every great destiny begins with unseen decisions. The habits we form in the silence of our private choices prepare us for the weight of public influence. Daniel's greatness did not begin in the lion's den or before kings. It began with a meal he chose not to eat. The lesson resonates deeply. In a world that constantly pressures individuals to conform, to blend in, to silence their convictions for the sake of convenience or advancement, Daniel stands as a reminder that conviction does not require volume. Sometimes it is found in the restraint of a simple no. His story invites reflection on the choices that shape character, especially when no one else is watching. Will we yield to pressure, or will we quietly remain true to who we are called to be? It is important to note that Daniel's strength was not born of arrogance. He did not parade his holiness. He did not judge others who may have made different choices. He simply lived with the unshakable awareness that his life belonged to God, even in a land that did not acknowledge him. His refusal was not fueled by rebellion, but by reverence. He was not trying to start a revolution. He was simply trying to remain faithful. There is a beauty in the way God honors such faithfulness. Daniel's decision could have isolated him, yet it opened doors instead. He and his friends found favor not only in the eyes of the official, but also with the king. When their training ended and they were presented to Nebuchadnezzar, the king found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his realm. What began as a quiet stand became the foundation for future influence. Daniel's early years in Babylon are a study in courage that does not shout, but endures. The courage to remember who you are when others try to redefine you. The courage to choose integrity when compromise seems easier. The courage to make small decisions that ripple into lasting impact. In a foreign land with unfamiliar gods, Daniel held fast to the one who had not forgotten him. And so his life whispers a challenge to every generation. When you find yourself in unfamiliar territory, when the pressure to conform surrounds you, when your name is changed and your surroundings are strange, will you remember whose you are? Will you choose faithfulness, even when it costs you comfort? Daniel did. And in doing so, he stepped onto a path that would shape history. Power has a tendency to surround itself with layers of protection, protocol, and pride. In the grand courts of kings, where golden thrones rest under ceilings painted with symbols of dominance, it is easy to imagine that the voice of heaven would be drowned out by the voices of rulers and generals. Yet in the narrative of Daniel, something remarkable happens. The most powerful man in the world, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, finds himself disturbed not by armies or rebellion, but by a dream. A vision sent in the night, uninvited, unexplained, and unforgettable, shakes the very foundations of an empire. And into that troubled silence, God places Daniel. The dream was not ordinary. It came with weight, as if heaven had touched the king's mind to remind him that despite all his conquests, he was still under authority. Nebuchadnezzar awoke agitated, gripped by a sense that the vision meant something profound. But instead of revealing the dream to his advisors and asking for an interpretation, he demanded that they tell him both the dream and its meaning. It was a test none of them could pass. The magicians, enchanters, and astrologers, trained in the arts of Babylonian divination, stood helpless. Their wisdom was exposed as hollow. The king, enraged by their failure, ordered all the wise men of Babylon to be executed. Daniel, though not present at the initial confrontation, was among those whose lives were suddenly at risk. Here, the story takes a sharp turn. Rather than panic, Daniel requested time. He returned to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and together they sought mercy from the God of heaven. It was not strategy or persuasion that saved them, but prayer. In the quiet hours of the night, a secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. The dream of the king was now known, along with its meaning. And in response, Daniel did not run immediately to Nebuchadnezzar. He paused first to offer praise, declaring in his heart what is recorded in words. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. Before the throne of a king, Daniel first bowed before the throne of God. When he stood before Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel did not take credit. He spoke with clarity and humility, saying that no wise man or magician could reveal the mystery, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. In those words, the divine pierced through royal pride. Daniel described the dream in vivid detail. A great statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet made partly of iron and partly of clay. A stone, not cut by human hands, struck the statue at its feet, shattering it into pieces. Then the stone became a great mountain that filled the earth. The interpretation was as powerful as the vision itself. The head of gold represented Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's own kingdom. After him would come another kingdom, inferior to his, then a third, and finally a fourth. Strong like iron but divided and unstable. Each layer of the statue marked a succession of empires, a prophetic timeline of human rule. But the climax was not in the empires themselves. It was in the stone. This stone, untouched by human effort, symbolized a kingdom established by God, one that would never be destroyed. It would crush all other kingdoms and stand forever. What Daniel declared in that moment was not just the meaning of a dream. He proclaimed that human authority, no matter how grand, is temporary. Every throne is on borrowed time. Every empire will eventually fall, but the kingdom of God is eternal. And in speaking this truth, Daniel delivered a message that dared to confront the illusion of Babylon's permanence. Nebuchadnezzar, astonished by the accuracy and depth of Daniel's words, fell prostrate before him. He acknowledged that Daniel's God was indeed the God of gods and the Lord of kings, a rare confession from a man who considered himself divine. Daniel was elevated, given authority over the province of Babylon, and placed in charge of all the wise men. The young exile who once refused the king's food now stood as the most trusted interpreter of heavenly mysteries in the empire's most powerful court. This part of Daniel's life reveals a crucial truth. Divine gifts open doors that human credentials cannot. Daniel had no political influence, no lineage that impressed Babylon, and no military power. What he did possess was a deep connection with the source of all wisdom. In a world that worships intellect, talent, and status, Daniel's rise reminds us that favor is not earned by conformity, but granted through faithfulness. More than this, it shows how the voice of God does not remain on the fringes. It moves directly into the center of power, confronting, correcting, and calling. Daniel did not bring that message with arrogance. He delivered it with reverence. He respected the king, but he honored God above all. His words were not designed to impress. They were meant to illuminate. The statue dream continues to resonate because it speaks to more than Babylon. It outlines the cycle of history itself. Kingdoms come and go. Nations rise in strength and then collapse under their own weight. But the kingdom of God, depicted as a stone cut without hands, is different. It does not rely on human ambition or conquest. It grows quietly, steadily, and irresistibly, and it will fill the whole earth. For those who listen, Daniel's role in this chapter is a call to believe that truth still matters, that God still speaks, and that those who remain in tune with his voice can change the course of nations. Daniel was not simply interpreting dreams. He was bringing light into places where shadows ruled. And when light enters, it cannot be hidden. In the rhythm of empire, obedience was not a request, it was a demand. Babylon, proud and towering, knew how to command the loyalty of its subjects through spectacle and fear. Nebuchadnezzar, intoxicated by the glory of his own kingdom, erected a golden image measuring 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. It was more than a statue. It was a test. When the music played, every official, servant, and citizen was to fall in submission. There was no room for negotiation, no category for conscience. The furnace waited for the defiant, and the flames promised to make a swift example of rebellion. In this grand performance of power, 3 young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to play their part. The command was clear, the consequences were clearer still. But these men, raised in exile and steeped in the ways of their ancestors, knew there was a line that could not be crossed. They had learned to navigate a foreign world with respect, to serve faithfully in a land not their own. But worship was something else entirely. To bow before that statue was not just a gesture, it was an act of surrender, a denial of the covenant they carried in their hearts. And when the music echoed across the plain, while the crowds bent their knees in submission, 3 figures remained upright. Word reached the king quickly. Nebuchadnezzar, once impressed by the wisdom of these men, now burned with fury at their defiance. He summoned them and gave them one last chance. His words were laced with threat and arrogance. If they did not bow, they would be thrown into the furnace immediately. And then came the challenge, bold and blasphemous. What God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Their reply has echoed through centuries. Without panic or hesitation, they answered that their God was able to deliver them from the flames, but even if he chose not to, they would not serve the image. It was not defiance for its own sake, but loyalty in its purest form. Their faith did not hinge on rescue. Their obedience was not conditioned by outcome. They were prepared to trust God in life or in death. Nebuchadnezzar's fury knew no bounds. The furnace was heated 7 times hotter than usual, so fierce that the very soldiers who threw the men in were consumed by its flames. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bound and helpless, were cast into the fire. But what followed shattered the illusion of Babylon's absolute power. The king, peering into the furnace, saw something he could not explain. Instead of 3, there were 4 men walking freely in the fire, untouched by the flames. And the 4th, he said, looked like a son of the gods. This moment, silent and mysterious, speaks of a divine presence that enters suffering rather than simply erasing it. The furnace did not vanish, the fire was not quenched. But in the very heart of the trial, God revealed himself. The ropes that had bound them were gone. Their clothes were unburned. Not even the smell of smoke lingered on them. They walked in the fire, not alone, but accompanied by one who stands beyond human comprehension. This unseen 4th man has captured the imagination of countless generations. Who was he? Some see a divine messenger, an angel sent by God. Others discern something even greater, a pre-incarnate glimpse of the Christ, walking with his servants in their hour of need. Whatever the identity, the message remains the same. When the fire surrounds you, God does not stand at a distance. He enters the heat with you. He does not always remove the trial, but he transforms it into a place of encounter. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego emerged from the furnace not just unharmed, but honored. Nebuchadnezzar, shaken and humbled, acknowledged their God as one who rescues and saves. He issued a decree that no one in his kingdom speak against the God of these 3 men. What began as a spectacle of forced worship ended as a testimony to true worship. Their stand in the shadows of a golden image became a spotlight for divine glory. This account, though Daniel is not present, reflects the same spirit that marked his life. These were his companions, molded by the same convictions, shaped by the same exile. They had learned together that faith was not about convenience, but commitment. They understood that the God of Israel was not confined to a temple or a homeland. He was present in Babylon, in palaces and prisons, and yes, even in furnaces. For those facing their own fires, moments of pressure, trials that test the soul, seasons where standing alone feels unbearable, this story offers more than encouragement. It offers assurance. The fire may come. The music of compromise may play loudly. But God is not absent. His presence is not restricted to the safe places. He walks among the flames. And when he does, chains fall, fear fades, and what was meant to destroy becomes the setting for divine revelation. There is a hidden strength that rises in those who know where their loyalty lies. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not seek to make a statement. They simply refused to betray their faith. And in doing so, they became part of a story that would inspire countless others to do the same. Their names, preserved in Scripture, stand as a reminder that courage is not the absence of danger, but the refusal to let fear dictate the terms of obedience. Their trial was public, their deliverance was undeniable, and in the fire, the line between heaven and earth grew thin. What Babylon intended as punishment, God turned into proclamation. And long after the golden statue has turned to dust, the memory of 3 men who chose the flame over falsehood continues to burn with holy fire. Feasting in the face of impending doom has long been a symbol of denial, of a soul intoxicated by power, oblivious to the sound of crumbling foundations beneath its feet. Babylon, once the shining jewel of empires, now stood bloated with pride and decadence. The reign of Nebuchadnezzar had long ended, and with it, the wisdom that once trembled before the God of Daniel. In its place came Belshazzar, a ruler more enthralled with spectacle than sobriety, a man who threw lavish banquets while enemies circled the city's walls. On the night that would become Babylon's last, the king hosted a feast unlike any other. 1,000 nobles gathered in the great halls, where gold gleamed under torchlight and laughter echoed against stone. But this was not merely a celebration. It was an act of arrogance. Belshazzar ordered that the sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem, items taken decades earlier by his predecessor, be brought to the feast. These vessels, once used in worship to the God of Israel, were now filled with wine for pagan toasts. Men and women raised goblets consecrated for holiness and used them to praise idols of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. It was a moment steeped in defiance. Belshazzar did not merely ignore the God of Daniel. He mocked him. He took what was sacred and made it profane. In doing so, he crossed an invisible line. That night, in the midst of laughter and intoxication, heaven interrupted. Without warning, a hand appeared. Not a body, not a voice, just fingers writing upon the plaster of the palace wall. No music, no fanfare, just the scratch of judgment etched into stone. The king froze, the color drained from his face. His knees gave way. The party fell silent. What had moments before been a scene of unbridled revelry now turned into a chamber of terror. The writing was visible for all to see, but its meaning lay hidden. The wisest men of Babylon were summoned, the astrologers and enchanters called upon once more, but none could decipher the message. Fear spread like a shadow. Then, in desperation, the queen entered. She remembered a man, one who had served in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, a man known for his insight and unshakable spirit. His name was Daniel. Now aged and likely forgotten by most in power, Daniel was brought before the king. Belshazzar offered him rewards, promises of gold, a purple robe, and the highest rank in the kingdom if he could read and explain the words. But Daniel had no use for titles or wealth. His response was blunt. "Keep your gifts for yourself," he said. What mattered was not honor from men, but truth from God. And Daniel, undeterred by the opulence around him, spoke. Before interpreting the message, he recounted history. He reminded Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar's pride, how that former king had been humbled by God until he acknowledged heaven's authority. But Belshazzar had not learned. Though he knew these things, he chose arrogance over reverence. He lifted himself against the Lord of heaven, brought out his holy vessels, and praised lifeless gods. In doing so, he sealed his fate. Then came the interpretation of the words inscribed by the divine hand. Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. These words were not suggestions, they were judgments. Not warnings for a distant future, but declarations of immediate consequence. Babylon, the invincible, had been measured by heaven and found lacking. Its time had expired. That very night, while the torches still flickered and the echoes of Daniel's words hung in the air, the prophecy was fulfilled. The city's gates, believed impenetrable, were breached. The Medo-Persian army, led by Cyrus the Great, entered Babylon. Belshazzar was slain, and the golden head of the great statue seen in Nebuchadnezzar's dream gave way to the chest and arms of silver. The age of Babylon was over. The fall of Babylon was not merely political or military. It was moral. An empire that once acknowledged the sovereignty of God had sunk into irreverence and mockery. Belshazzar's feast was not the cause of Babylon's fall, but the final act in a long play of pride and rebellion. It served as a stark reminder that no kingdom, no matter how powerful, can mock justice without consequence. Daniel, the lone voice of truth in a palace of delusion, once again stood firm. He did not tailor his message to suit the mood. He did not soften the blow to gain favor. He spoke what was given to him and let the weight of heaven's judgment fall where it must. In doing so, he revealed that truth, even when unwelcome, remains uncompromising. This episode continues to resonate not because of its dramatic setting, but because of its timeless message. Arrogance precedes downfall. When the sacred is treated as common, and when power is used to elevate self rather than acknowledge God, collapse is not a question of if, but when. The handwriting may not always appear on the wall, but the scales of justice remain balanced in the hand of the eternal judge. Loyalty that endures across regimes is a rare kind of strength. When kings change and empires shift, allegiances are often recalibrated. Words become cautious, and once bold convictions soften to accommodate new expectations. But Daniel, now an old man under the reign of Darius the Mede, had not learned the language of self-preservation. His consistency did not come from a desire to please kings, but from a life anchored in disciplines that no decree could touch. Though he had served with distinction under Babylonian rule and earned the favor of Persian authorities, his heart had never bowed to the systems of men. His allegiance was unwavering, and that integrity would soon be put to the ultimate test. Darius, recognizing Daniel's extraordinary spirit, planned to set him over the entire kingdom. It was not his age nor his past achievements that set him apart, but the excellence that still radiated from him, an excellence rooted not in ambition, but in devotion. This recognition, however, stirred jealousy among the other officials. They searched for fault in his administration, but found none. Daniel was faithful in his duties, neither corrupt nor negligent. Unable to find a flaw in his public life, they turned their focus to his private one. They knew that his prayer life was the one area he would not compromise. And so they devised a trap, subtle in design but deadly in intent. They approached Darius with a proposal that flattered his ego, a law that no one could petition any god or man except the king for 30 days. Framed as a temporary act of unity and loyalty, it played perfectly into the pride of the ruler. Once the decree was signed, it could not be revoked, not even by the king himself. The snare was set. Daniel's enemies knew exactly where he would be. And they were right. When Daniel heard that the decree had been issued, he did not retreat or reconsider. He returned to his house, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and knelt down 3 times a day, just as he had always done. There was no drama, no defiance for the sake of appearance. He simply prayed, giving thanks before his God, just as he had since the days of his youth. In a world where even the suggestion of faith could lead to death, Daniel remained consistent, not because he expected rescue, but because his relationship with God was not negotiable. There is something deeply powerful in this image, a man, aged and alone, praying with windows open while the machinery of persecution turns against him. It was not arrogance. It was clarity. Daniel knew who he was, and more importantly, he knew whose he was. The law may have changed, but the source of his strength had not. His devotion was not loud, but it was visible. It was not confrontational, but it was unmistakable. And that quiet, consistent faith became a threat too great for the corrupt to tolerate. When the trap was sprung and Daniel was brought before Darius, the king was devastated. Unlike Belshazzar, who had mocked God with impunity, Darius respected Daniel and recognized the injustice of the situation. But the law could not be altered. The sentence had to be carried out. With sorrow, the king ordered Daniel to be thrown into the lion's den, uttering words that revealed more faith than he realized. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." The den was sealed with a stone, and the king spent a sleepless night, fasting and restless. The same palace that had once hosted feasts of blasphemy now trembled with anxiety over the fate of one man. At dawn, Darius rushed to the den and cried out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to rescue you from the lions?" The reply came, clear and calm. Daniel, alive and unharmed, answered that God had sent his angel to shut the mouths of the lions. He had been found innocent before God, and he had done no wrong before the king. Darius, overwhelmed with relief and awe, ordered Daniel lifted from the pit. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. In a dramatic reversal, Those who had plotted Daniel's death were themselves thrown into the den, where the lions revealed the full force of their power. And Darius, now a witness to the divine, issued a decree proclaiming the greatness of Daniel's God, whose kingdom is eternal and whose dominion endures. This chapter in Daniel's life stands as one of the most recognized and revered stories in all of Scripture, not because of the danger he faced, but because of the calm with which he faced it. He did not argue his case. He did not demand special treatment. He simply remained faithful, knowing that the same God who had been with him in exile, in courtrooms and in dreams, was also with him among the lions. There is a lesson here that speaks beyond the ancient stone and iron of Persia. Laws may change, governments may shift, and cultures may pressure faith to become private and silent. But those who know their God do not hide their devotion behind closed doors. They pray with windows open. They live unashamed. They trust not in the favor of rulers, but in the faithfulness of the one who sees in secret and delivers in power. Daniel's trial, engineered to silence him, became the loudest testimony of divine faithfulness in a hostile world. What was meant to end his influence only expanded it. The lion's den, a symbol of death and fear, became a stage for God's protection and glory. And the man who prayed with open windows walked out of that darkness into the light of royal honor once more. Not all visions come in moments of peace. Some arrive with the force of a storm, pulling back the veil that separates time from eternity, exposing realities too vast for the natural mind to contain. When Daniel began receiving apocalyptic visions, the world around him had already shifted. He was no longer a young exile interpreting the dreams of kings. He had become a prophet receiving dreams of his own, ones that shook him to his core. What unfolded was not merely personal revelation, but a divine unveiling of the rise and fall of nations, the currents of history, and the throne that stands above every empire. The vision began at night, not in silence, but in chaos. The four winds of heaven stirred up the great sea, a symbol of restless humanity and the tumult of earthly powers. From the churning waters emerged four beasts, each unlike the other, each more troubling than the last. These were not the elegant creatures of creation, but grotesque hybrids, distortions of what was natural, living metaphors for the empires of man. The first beast, like a lion with eagle's wings, was majestic yet terrifying. Its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground to stand on 2 feet like a man, given the heart of a man. This symbol has long been understood as representing Babylon, powerful and swift, but ultimately humbled and humanized. The imagery evokes the transformation of Nebuchadnezzar himself, who was brought low in madness only to be restored with the recognition of divine authority. The imagery of 4 heads implies a fragmentation that retains influence, and the wings speak of unprecedented speed in military expansion. The 4th beast defies comparison. It is not likened to any animal, but described as terrifying, dreadful, and exceedingly strong. With iron teeth and 10 horns, it crushed and devoured its victims, leaving nothing in its wake. This final empire is more than a historical kingdom. It is a symbol of the culmination of worldly power, represented in many interpretations as the Roman Empire or a future system of dominion. Among the 10 horns, a smaller one emerges, speaking arrogantly, uprooting 3, and displaying eyes like a man, full of intelligence, yet marked by blasphemy and pride. At this point, The vision takes a turn from the earth to the heavens. Thrones are set in place, and the Ancient of Days takes his seat. His clothing is white as snow, his hair like pure wool. His throne is ablaze with fire, its wheels a burning flame. Thousands upon thousands serve him. 10,000 times 10,000 stand before him. The court is seated, and the books are opened. This is not metaphor, this is majesty. In contrast to the chaos of the beasts, the courtroom of heaven is ordered and radiant. The Ancient of Days is a title that speaks of timeless authority, purity, and justice. In his presence, the boastful horn is judged, and the fourth beast is destroyed. Dominion is taken from the others, yet they are allowed to live for a time. The image is complex but deliberate. Power is permitted, not permanent. Every empire exists only by divine allowance and is ultimately accountable to the throne above all thrones. And then, in the midst of this celestial court, comes a figure described as one like a son of man. He approaches the Ancient of Days and is given dominion, glory, and a kingdom that will never be destroyed. This figure is both human and exalted, humble yet enthroned. Daniel's vision here reaches beyond history into eternity, presenting the one whose reign transcends every other, the Messiah, the eternal King. This is no ordinary prophecy. The title Son of Man becomes central to the teachings of Jesus centuries later. It is here, in Daniel's vision, that its deepest meaning is rooted. The Son of Man is not simply a teacher or a prophet. He is the one who receives authority from the Ancient of Days himself, whose kingdom shall not pass away. The beastly empires of men rise and fall, but this kingdom remains. Daniel was troubled by the vision. He approached one of the heavenly beings and asked for understanding. The explanation came. The four beasts represent four kingdoms that will rise from the earth, but the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. In the end, it is not the beasts that have the final word, but the people of God. Not through violence, but through divine inheritance. The vision was not meant to instill fear, but faith. Despite appearances, despite the dominance of tyrants, heaven rules. This chapter of Daniel is pivotal because it reveals not only what will happen, but why it matters. The apocalyptic language, while strange and complex, is grounded in a singular truth. God governs history. The chaos of nations, the cruelty of regimes, the arrogance of rulers, all of it is seen, judged, and ordered from above. The vision assures that no matter how terrifying the world becomes, the throne of the Ancient of Days remains unmoved. And for every generation that reads Daniel's words, the message echoes still. There will be beasts. There will be kingdoms that devour and systems that exalt themselves against God. But in the midst of it all, there is a throne surrounded by fire, a courtroom where justice is never delayed, and a Son of Man whose kingdom knows no end. The dream Daniel received was not just for his time, it was for ours too. Revelation often arrives not with thunder, but in stillness, not in the clamor of nations, but in the trembling of one man who dares to seek truth beyond the surface. By the time Daniel received the visions recorded in chapters 10 through 12, he had spent a lifetime in prayer, discipline, and divine encounters. Yet what unfolded before him now would be unlike anything he had seen before. These final chapters are not concerned with the familiar landscapes of palaces and thrones. They instead open a window into the invisible realms, where angels and forces of darkness contend over nations, and where time itself bends beneath the weight of prophecy. It begins with mourning. Daniel had been fasting for 3 weeks, no meat, no wine, no rich food, grieved in spirit and longing for understanding. He stood by the Tigris River when a figure appeared, radiant and overwhelming. Dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold, his face like lightning, eyes like flaming torches, arms and legs like burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. Those who were with Daniel fled in terror, though they saw nothing. He alone remained, trembling and weak before the presence of what many have. understood to be either a mighty angel or a theophanic encounter with the divine. What follows is not a general word of comfort, but a revelation of war, spiritual war. The messenger explains that he was delayed by the prince of the Persian kingdom for 21 days, until Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help him. This single statement shatters any illusion that the conflicts of earth are isolated from the movements of heaven. Empires rise, kings make decrees, armies march, but behind these visible actions lies a struggle among spiritual beings. Principalities and powers battle for influence over realms and rulers. Daniel's prayers, persistent and humble, had been heard from the first day, but the response required angelic warfare to break through. As the vision continues, the angel unveils a detailed and unsettling panorama of future events. Kings of the north and south will rise and fall, alliances will form and fracture, and Jerusalem will stand at the center of turmoil. The precision of the prophecies is staggering. They span generations, foretelling the movements of Persia, the rise of Greece under Alexander the Great, the fragmentation of his empire, and the emergence of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a king infamous for his persecution of the Jewish people and his desecration of the temple. It is this Antiochus who introduces one of the most haunting phrases in prophetic literature, the abomination that causes desolation. In historical context, it refers to his act of placing a pagan altar in the temple and halting the daily sacrifices. But the term extends beyond its immediate fulfillment. Jesus himself would later reference it as a sign of future tribulation, a prophetic marker that would signal the nearing of the end. In Daniel, this act is not only a historical outrage, but a symbol of ultimate rebellion, a pattern that repeats whenever the sacred is profaned and truth is trampled. The narrative moves into darker waters, describing a time of distress such as has never occurred since nations began. This is the Great Tribulation, a period marked by deception, persecution, and the testing of faith. Yet even here, the message is not despair. It is clarity. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness will be like stars forever and ever. Though the days grow darker, the light of the faithful grows stronger. Then, suddenly, the vision lifts its gaze even further to the resurrection. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. This is one of the clearest Old Testament references to bodily resurrection, a hope not grounded in theory, but in divine promise. Death is not the end. Injustice does not have the final word. There will be a day when the graves yield their dead, when the silence of centuries is broken by the voice of judgment and reward. Daniel, overwhelmed, is told to seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. The knowledge will increase, and many will run to and fro seeking understanding. He asks the question that has echoed in the hearts of many ever since. How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The answer, cryptic and symbolic, points to a time, times, and half a time, a phrase loaded with meaning, hinting at periods of trial that are both limited and divinely measured. Though he receives great insight, Daniel is not given full understanding. The vision closes not with absolute clarity, but with a reaffirmation of purpose. Go your way, he is told, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. He is not asked to unravel every mystery, but to remain faithful. He is promised rest, and that he will rise to receive his allotted inheritance at the end of the days. These final chapters pull back the curtain not only on history, but on reality itself. They reveal that history is not random. Every king, every conflict, every decree is part of a larger tapestry woven by the hand of God. Spiritual battles rage unseen. Human choices have eternal weight. Prophecy is not given to satisfy curiosity, but to call hearts to steadfastness. The same forces that shaped Daniel's visions still move across the earth. The same promise of resurrection still holds. And the same God who revealed the end to his servant still reigns, undisturbed by the chaos of time. In this time of war and resurrection, where shadows stretch and truth is often contested, Daniel's voice calls once more, not to panic, but to perceive, not to retreat, but to rise. The battle is real, but so is the victory. The pages of Daniel's story do not close with political victory or personal comfort. They end in vision, in mystery, and in quiet assurance that his life, though lived in exile and shadowed by foreign thrones, had always been shaped by a higher hand. The final chapter of this narrative is not one of retirement, but of revelation. Daniel, having seen kingdoms crumble and heard the voice of heaven in dreams and angelic messages, fades from the written record not with fanfare, but with faith. His legacy, however, does not fade. It remains, etched into history, prophecy, and the hearts of those who continue to draw strength from his unwavering devotion. From the very beginning, Daniel's life was marked by displacement. He was taken from his homeland, immersed in a culture that sought to erase his identity, and subjected to the whims of kings who saw him as useful, but never truly understood him. Yet through every test, whether dietary in the palace, prophetic before rulers, or mortal in the lion's den, Daniel stood firm, not because he sought greatness, but because he knew the one who holds every kingdom in his grasp. He did not rise through rebellion or manipulation. His elevation came through obedience. His influence was not a result of ambition, but of alignment with the will of God. Daniel's visions laid a prophetic foundation for the generations that followed. His symbolic language, his apocalyptic imagery, and his glimpses into future conflict and eternal justice became the groundwork for the New Testament's climactic revelations. Jesus would call himself the Son of Man, borrowing Daniel's very phrase to identify his mission and his destiny. The book of Revelation, with its beasts and thrones, owes a profound debt to the scrolls Daniel was instructed to seal. Yet Daniel's legacy is more than prophetic, it is personal. It speaks to those who find themselves between cultures, navigating systems that do not honor their convictions, striving to remain faithful in environments that reward compromise. He shows that integrity is not circumstantial. It does not wait for convenience or ideal conditions. It is forged in quiet rooms where prayers rise 3 times a day, in decisions made when no one else understands, and in a heart that chooses holiness even when there is no applause. Daniel reminds us that the unseen disciplines of the Spirit are the most powerful tools we carry. He was a man of dreams and visions, yes, but more than that. He was a man of prayer, humility, and courage. His story does not promise that faithfulness will prevent trials. On the contrary, it shows that faithfulness invites testing. But it also testifies that in every trial, whether it be a furnace, a den, or a throne room filled with trembling rulers, God is present. He does not abandon those who walk with him. He reveals, protects, delivers, and upholds. The world Daniel inhabited may have seemed vast and unstoppable, filled with stone idols, arrogant kings, and shifting empires. But the narrative that emerges from his life is that of a deeper, truer kingdom. One that does not crumble under siege or fade with time. A kingdom ruled by the Ancient of Days and entrusted to the Son of Man. It is this kingdom that calls to every generation to live not for the temporary, but for the eternal. Not for favor with kings, but for fellowship with God. And so Daniel's story ends where it began, in faith. He does not see the full outcome of all he has been shown. He is not asked to explain every symbol or predict every detail. He is told simply to go his way, to rest, and to rise. It is the kind of ending that invites not resolution, but reflection. It is a reminder that our part in God's story may not always be fully understood now, but it is never unnoticed. Like Daniel, we live in the tension between what is and what will be, anchored by the certainty that the one who governs all things has not forgotten us. If this message has spoken to you, if Daniel's life has encouraged you to remain faithful, to pray with courage, to walk boldly in truth, even when the cost is high, I invite you to subscribe to this channel for more stories and messages rooted in Scripture. Like this video to show your support. Leave a comment sharing what part of Daniel's journey impacted you most, and share this video with someone you love. Let the legacy of Daniel continue not just through pages, but through lives awakened to God's greater plan.